Sexton trying to get loose. He'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down. Toro slammed it home. Garland upstairs. Oh! Sexton inside. A thunderous dunk. And Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. And connecting with me now, live via Zoom, is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you to Yosh322 in the YouTube chat, shouting out the new Cavs swag. Got to show off the new shirt. It's so pretty.
We got the old and new right now.
The old and the new.
Old hoopy, and you got the new one, man.
I love me a skinny V in the end, with the the little cutoff on the edge that
Carter,
differentiates the new from the old.
I'll be honest. Nobody has looked better in the new Cavs logo than Ochai Agbaji. My goodness,
it all
is
looks
that a handsome
great.
Man.
It all
He is
looks
a handsome man. How you doing, buddy? It's been a minute since the draft. We've had some time to kind of digest everything. We were absolutely exhausted at the end of the spaces and podcasts that we did on Thursday night. How you feeling?
Yeah, I think I've had some time to settle in on the draft. I think should we just talk through it? Should we just talk through how we're feeling in the macro about, the way how it ended up playing out? Because I think, obviously we can dive into some of the second round picks, which we did not talk about last week because, frankly, we needed a little bit of time to go.
And also, we finished recording before those picks were even made.
Yes. But I think in the macro, I think it was a solid draft for the Cavs, but one that maybe left me a little bit colder than I wanted to feel. I think that I as you well know, I fell desperately in love with Jalen Williams, and he went off the board way before anyone thought. People were talking about 14 being a reach for Williams. So the Thunder trading 3 firsts, which, by the way, love it for OKC. I think this was the only palatable way for them to use their bevy of $4 billion first round picks is to I think people thought they were going to use them to trade up to the first overall pick, but that's impossible. So you have to just overpay to trade back into drafts or to find ways to move up 7 or 8 spots. So big shout outs to them for kind of doing the best thing they could do with their somewhat depreciated assets. So Williams is off the board, Jang's off the board. So really it kind of came down to Agbaji versus Griffin. If you were a huge Griffin fan, you're probably really upset. If you weren't or were a little cooler, then, you're fine with Agbaji. He's definitely the lower upside play, but the more reliable play, the guy who's because for all the best shooter in college talk that Griffin has, he has a really weird form that's super duper wide base that you're just wondering, is this going to work? And injury issues. So I get the Agbaji pick. I think the second round, it's weird to let the second round ever make you cold in the draft. I think we just all thought more was coming when they bought that extra second that became Isaiah Mobley. And based on the reporting, they tried to combine their picks to move up, and no deals really became available, and that's frustrating because the Cavs have a ton of roster spots already accounted for. So I feel like they kind of felt like they had to go draft and stash a couple folks in Khalifa Diop and Luke Travers and say, hey, maybe in a couple years you can come over because they just didn't have room. And I think that's a byproduct of them doing good in the last couple years in the second round and undrafted players. Guys like Lamar Stevens and Dean Wade, in my opinion, are just better than a guy like EJ Liddell right now. I'm not high on EJ Liddell.
You talked me through that in real time because I was kind of going for, hey, Liddell's still here. That's a really interesting opportunity. And you were kind of correcting me in real time saying, are we confident that he's going to be better than Dean Wade or Lamar Stevens? Dean Wade, even going back to our draft coverage that year, Trevor Magnotti was saying that he was a first round talent that fell because of some injuries that he had in college. But we now have proof of concept when it comes to him. And and we know that he's someone that's going to stay ready. He can fill in those roles. So I kind of understand that. I think it's natural to feel some disappointment because when you saw that trade for that additional second round pick, I think the logical conclusion, and the reporting has kind of backed this up, is, they're going to position themselves to potentially move back into the first round. And I think there was a combination of factors. You see some of the reporting saying that future first round picks were also required in addition to the seconds. I think another major factor, and probably the biggest one, is that the players still available in kind of that mid to late 20s where you might be able to trade back into it weren't players that they felt were
Dalen Terry didn't fall to 23.
Right. Dalen Terry goes at 18, much higher than expected. Marjan Beauchamp goes pretty early to the Bucks. Really like that fit. I am kind of excited to see how that plays out. But it basically seems like, hey, the Ty Washington didn't seem worth it to them. And some of the prospects available in that range didn't seem worth it. And I, as disappointing as it is to process, at the same time, it's kind of like in poker when you bet the blind, you see the flop, and it's not good. You're not pot committed just because you bet the blind. Sometimes you have to fold them. You got to know when to fold them, Carter.
You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
Exactly. And it's kind of funny because some of this post-draft coverage has been, the Cavs are no longer in a position where they want to take a swing. And I don't know if that's my takeaway here, because there was reporting that I believe Brian Windhorst, Chris Fedor have reported that there was efforts to trade up to 11. Obviously, they weren't going to give up 3 first-round picks to move up to 11. But you'd have to assume that's to take a swing on a guy like Jalen Williams or Ousmane Dieng, right? But when you get to 14 and all of a sudden your options are a little bit different, you have to kind of weigh what is the upside of the swing, because taking a swing, no one's going to think of it that way in 2-3 years. Like if you draft AJ Griffin, ignore the medicals, and kind of do what I was advocating for, you have to face the very real possibility that, hey, this just doesn't work out. And if AJ Griffin's knees are bad, or if he isn't the player that some of us think he could be, or that his upside may be at a certain level, if he doesn't hit that plateau, no one's going to say, well, the Cavs had to take a swing. It's, oh my goodness, they missed an opportunity to add a player. And I think both of us throughout the coverage, from the start of the draft coverage to the end, said Agbaji is someone that we feel pretty confident is at the very least going to be a rotation player. And who knows, like, it's going to come down to player development. We said that over and over and over again. And I think that's really true when it comes to Agbaji. Like, even though he is an older prospect, he's still getting with pro trainers for the first time. And he's someone that has got better every single year throughout his career.
Yeah, I mean, I said from the beginning, even when Agbaji, started slipping down my board a little bit after my initial, straight up insane infatuation, was I'd be fine with Agbaji being the pick, and he was, and I'm fine with it. Like, It's kind of that simple. The age thing is scary. Everything, the pieces that he does bring do need to be there, because I think the stuff that's not there, in terms of the playmaking, I don't know if that's going to come. But with that said, I think it's a very solid pick, and if I think the combination of a high floor pick at 14, and then just the weirdness of that second round just put people in a bad spot. But again, like, and by the way, and I'm sorry to go back to the Lamar Stevens, Dean Wade point with adding additional players that aren't on two ways, like Isaiah Mobley is reportedly going to be joining on per Chris Fedor, or at least that's the current idea. Is it's not just that you have to pick who you think is better, between an EJ Liddell, let's say it's him, or Dean Wade or Lamar Stevens. You have to cut bait with one of those players who have been culture built in the form of Dean Wade. His contract's reported to be fully guaranteed this year. Lamar is reported to be non-guaranteed, but you literally said in post games, this guy's the heart and soul of our team.
He's got that dog in him, Carter. I've seen the x-rays.
Yes. So it is, there are so many repercussions of choices like that have to be considered. And, sure, there's other role players that, just frankly have higher reported cap numbers that, maybe people are more ready to move on from, but it's not always that easy to do that. And, so I think that the second round I'm not, it's tough with draft and stashes these days because you don't know when they're going to come over or if they're going to come over. But by the way,
honestly, what my hope is when it comes to draft and stash is that they show enough promise overseas that a team cares about them enough to have them included in a trade in the future. Like that's my hope. I think it's worth noting both Adam Spinella and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but Locked On Cavs had a draft expert on after. Both of them have said that they feel like Khalifa Diop is going to be an NBA player and can be a backup in a couple of years. So I know absolutely nothing about him. We are out of draft season, so
we're going to see him in summer league, which will be really fun.
We are going to see him in summer league, which is going to be really fun. But if you can get a cost control big for in 2-3 years down the road when other aspects of the roster become more expensive, that's interesting. Like that could be a really productive play. But in the meantime, you get a stash guy. And one other gripe. I've got 3 gripes, Carter. The first was
when are we going to talk Mobley? We're going to talk
Mobley in a second. We're going to talk Mobley in a second. But first gripe was the Cavs no longer willing to take swings. Number 2 was the whole finished product thing with Agbaji. First of all, Kobe Altman said more of a finished product, not calling him a finished product. Other thing I'll point out is 4 of the last 9 players to win most improved player in the NBA came into the NBA as 22-year-old rookies. And a whole bunch of the runners up within those years were either 22 or older. Buddy Hield at 24 years old as a rookie got into that most improved conversation. So typically when you draft an older rookie, I think it's unwise to expect massive changes to their game. Like, I don't think Agbaji's all of a sudden going to become Kyrie Irving with his handle, but you can get better and more productive and have a better understanding of the game and kind of refine the existing skills you have and become a more productive player. So to call him a finished product, I think is unwise. My final gripe, Carter, before we get into the rest of the picks, I understand this. Like when we talked about like Jalen Williams and we say, well, he only made 43 3-pointers in college the last year, but the free throw numbers are good. Free throws numbers are a very good indication when you're talking about a low volume college shooter that might indicate that he shows some touch, that he can develop a 3-point shot in the future. It is not something that can disprove a larger sample of threes than free throws. And I've seen this with Agbaji. What we're talking about over the last 2 years is him taking about 450 threes at 39%. That is not a sample size that can be disproven by 100 free throws at like 75%. People need to calm down with this whole free throws mean more than 3-pointers. It does not when you're talking about 3 times the sample size on made threes versus free throws.
Yes, completely agree with you there. And I think there is just that degree of that. I'm sympathetic to that vibe from Agbaji skeptics, just insofar as you hear best shooter in the draft, you don't expect 74% free throw shooting. Yeah. And if you are looking for red flags, it is one. It's a factor that it's a data point that's got to be considered. I think, like, to me, my bigger concern with the shooting is that I just don't believe in anyone shooting. I'm very nihilistic about this. Yeah. In my analysis of prospects historically, which is basically it's so hard to be a good shooter in the NBA. The line being a couple feet further back ain't nothing, guys. Mm-hmm. Like there's a reason college play-by-play announcers go absolutely bananas when players hit NBA range threes in college games. It's hard. JJ Redick did not have a good first couple years shooting the basketball. The athleticism, the closeouts are better. The spacing's better, but the closeouts are better. The pressure is higher. And I always assume there's going to be an adjustment period to the NBA 3. That's not always the case.
Yeah, that's fair.
But unless you are literally, Dylan Windler, a guy who has not shot a good 3-point percentage or nearly the elite shooter that we thought he'd be. And, a lot of that is due to injuries. But my point is shooting is less of a defined trait as we think it is. And my biggest concern with Agbaji, even though I think it was a perfectly worthwhile risk to take, is if he's not a great shooter that can sprint off a pin down and hit a three off the curl on the left wing, then are the other deficiencies going to seem worse? So I feel that there is a degree of concern that I have with every reputed shooter when shooting is a very big part of what's going to make them successful, because it's just so hard to play NBA basketball and be a good shooter in the NBA, because it's just hard. I do think what I'm not worried about, by the way, is actually the defense. Do I think he's Isaac Okoro? No. And I think
few people are on ball at that age.
Yeah, and I think some people kind of think he's going to like I think some of the optimists think they're getting, we're going to have the Okoro defense, but with a guy who can shoot. I'm like, no, Okoro is an absolute monster on ball. But I do think there is a huge difference in the role that Agbaji played for Kansas and the role Isaac played in Auburn. Agbaji was had to work hard on both ends of the floor and was the best player on the best team in college basketball. And I'm excited to see
have a much easier role with Darius Garland.
Yes, I'm excited to see kind of how he can reinvest some energy on the defensive end, knowing that he's here to play a role at this point. But I do want to talk about Isaiah Mobley, because I got pre-grumpy and then smug in short order about the Mobley pick.
I've never seen you go through that process, Carter.
Oh, I know you haven't. But I the second he was picked, the joke started rolling, especially from some Cavs fans. Some of the more negative Cavs fans, they're like, "Oh, you're just, Thanasis Antetokounmpo, J.R. Smith's brother. Like, this is a nepotism pick." Guys, this kid can play basketball. He was the best player on USC. He was the best passer on USC, playing the big. This guy has a very similar basketball brain to Evan Mobley. He doesn't have the body of Evan Mobley or the athleticism of Evan Mobley, but he can think the game at a very, very high level. He's tall. He's got length. I think people are going to be really, really surprised at how capable of a player Isaiah Mobley is. Adam Spinella had him 40th on his big board.
Yeah, Sam Vecini was very high on him as well.
I won't pretend to have done a 60-player big board, but I definitely, from what I've seen, I see a guy who has a very, very good chance of being a contributing NBA player. His brother, notwithstanding. I went from grumpy at some of the nepotism jokes straight into wait till people actually see this guy play, because he's pretty freaking good.
Well, Carter, I've never been in that type of a mode, feeling smug about
that wouldn't be
knowing something that other people don't know about certain players. I mean, some people will compare guys to DJ Augustine, and they just...
If Darius ever hears about this is not going to bode well for me.
And you deserve all of it. I agree. I think Isaiah Mobley's absolutely going to be an NBA player. You're talking about someone that can guard both the 4 and the 5, has very good defensive instincts, understands verticality, is a much better shooter, not the same level of athlete, but he is a brilliant passer as well, and those two have played together. I think, honestly, kind of the reporting about him being on a two-way, getting those reps for the charge, I think that's going to be perfect to start the year. You go down there, you understand the system, you get to practice with the Cavs as well. One of the advantages of having that team in town, get familiar with the defensive systems, because at the end of the day, center is basically the captain of the defense, right? You are quarterbacking it. You're basically the point guard of the defense, and that takes time to learn. But it would not surprise me if by the tail end of the season, you're able to get solid minutes out of him, similar to what we saw with other guys that got called up last year, like Brandon Goodwin and other players that filled in a role. I can absolutely see Isaiah Mobley being a NBA player and a quality backup for the Cavs moving forward. So I think this is an objectively good pick. I was high on Mobley. We talked about him prior to the draft, and if another team would have picked him, I think that he could be a very helpful player for them, kind of in that Al Horford type of mold. Obviously not the same talent as Al Horford, but a similar archetype. So
I'm such a believer, Justin. I mean, this is I've got Adam Spinella's video up if you're watching on YouTube, and averaged the same assist per 40 as Jaden Ivey and Paolo Banchero at the 5. Ooh. This guy can pass out of the short roll. He can make skip passes. He can play the two big high low. He can hit trailer threes. He can dribble and pass. Which that sounds like a silly statement, but most people at 6'10", 6'11" cannot dribble the ball with a head of steam and hit a shooter in the corner. And Isaiah Mobley can. Honestly, I think he's got a very, very real chance of becoming the backup five of the future for the Cavs. And like, I don't say that lightly. Like, I think that it's definitely a role he's gonna have to earn. But like, I think he can do it. I know that the second round pick margin for error is it's a challenge, to say the least. But like, I just believe in this kid. I really think I might be higher on Isaiah Mobley, especially within the context of this Cavs team, than like, I think I'm in like the 95th percentile for optimism on this kid.
I'm pretty high on him too. I'm excited. Obviously, going past the basketball from a vibe standpoint, it's awesome to have him around. Obviously, I think they're pretty comfortable with kind of what his family's all about, and obviously, it's cool that both Evan and Isaiah have played together at every single level. They got chemistry together. That's going to matter if you're talking about him realizing his potential and earning a spot as a consistent NBA player. At that point in the draft, like, that's a great swing to take for just about any team, and I think it's an even better one for the Cavs. So I was very excited with that. To circle back just a little bit before we move on from the draft picks, I think the points you raised about the shooting with Agbaji and basically any prospect are very fair. I'm here for fair criticism. I just thought the free throw aspect was a little stupid. The one thing I'll note, though, is I think the most important thing for him is being a willing shooter and having that gravity, especially year one. You look at Lauri Markkanen as an example, and he didn't shoot great last year. Like, he shot just under 36%. But when you look at adding him to the Garland, Allen, and Mobley lineup, it took them from a plus 1.5 net rating to a plus 12.2 net rating. And that had a lot to do with kind of the spacing and the willingness to shoot. And when you're talking about Agbaji's ability to hit contested shots, which he did throughout college, willing to at least take those movement shots, I think that's going to, no matter how he produces individually, I think that kind of action and what he can bring to the table is going to make the lineups more than the sum of their parts, which I think is really, really important and one of the keys to the Cavs' success last season.
I think I said this in our Discord. If he is as good or better of a shooter as Lauri this year, then it's a hit. It's at minimum a single, probably veering towards a double. That bar is not that high. To your point, like, Lauri hit, he was a pretty okay volume 3-point shooter last year. He had real hot stretches that really dragged that percentage up. He also had really cold stretches. So if Agbaji can hit that benchmark, like, I think that's kind of my if you were to ask me what my hope for him is, at least Lauri as a shooter.
Yeah, but process over
volume and percentage. But
process over results. Like, if he's a willing shooter and he's doing the things that the coaching staff wants him to do, I think their Cavs are going to be in a really, really good spot. Carter, I am so happy, though, to put this draft behind us. I think I'm higher on Agbaji than you. You are obviously a massive Isaiah Mobley fan, although we're both in on him. So that's a lot of fun.
I recognize the possibility that I'm going to look really stupid with Isaiah Mobley, but like, you're not supposed to fawn over a second round pick like this, but I just really like him as a player.
It's okay. No one's going to remember anything we say anyways at the end of the day. But I'm happy to put the draft behind us because, let's be honest, it's not our biggest strength. I'd actually like to thank all of the listeners that reach out to us after the draft coverage, that just saying that you really enjoyed it and we helped you kind of guide you guys through that. It was really, really appreciated because I don't feel like that's our sweet spot. But Carter, we are getting back into the sweet spot in a big way this week on the podcast, because we get to talk rotations, we get to talk free agent possibilities, we get to talk basketball philosophy. I'm very excited. But before we get into all that, we do have a little bit of business to discuss. Colin Sexton was extended the qualifying offer today. The Cavs confirmed, making him a restricted free agent. No big surprise there.
Same with RJ Nembhard.
RJ Nembhard did as well. I think it's important to note Brandon Goodwin no longer eligible for a two-way contract, so that's something worth considering. But I would assume that Nembhard and Mobley would be the front runners to get those two-way spots. Also, some interesting stuff around the NBA, especially when it comes to Colin Sexton, was draft night was a little interesting from the Sexton leverage standpoint, because a lot of those teams, whether it be Detroit, Indiana, Washington, San Antonio, all of them added guards in the draft and used high picks to do so. So that's very interesting. I kind of assumed with Jalen Duren being in Detroit that took them out of the DeAndre Ayton sweepstakes, although Jonathan Gavoni on Zach Lowe's podcast did mention he may still go to Detroit because he wants to play power forward. Interesting.
Does Detroit want him to play power forward?
I think Detroit wants talent, man. Like,
I don't know about this one.
Carter, this is just another example of the Cavs really setting a tone and everyone wanting this twin tower philosophy. You know, they see the future of the NBA and it's wine and gold.
The Cavs supersized Ford doesn't mind contact, though.
That's true. That's very true. I also thought it was interesting. Gavoni had noted, and this, I think this was actually just kind of an interesting anecdote and good for everyone to keep in mind when it comes to off season and rumor season. He mentioned that in talking to front offices, he says they usually have about 40 to 60 versions of trades being discussed at any given time. If one leaks, that doesn't exactly tell you that they would even do the deal or where it is on their priority list. So it is about to be silly season. I think we need to take everything into context and understand that there's a lot of rumors. There's a lot of sides trying to get leverage in every single discussion. So just take everything with a grain of salt, guys. The next couple weeks.
It's going to get wild.
It's going to get a little nutty.
So I think you are 100% right. A lot of the Sexton suitors, loaded up at the 2-guard spot. There's just no way around it. Spurs took Branham. Pacers added kind of a couple wings as well. And
Matherin's a big shooting guard in my eyes.
I would agree. Jaden Ivey obviously is kind of the two of the future in Detroit, and kind of lets them play Cade at the one, which is like the dream for them. And
Johnny Davis alongside Beal in Washington.
Yep. So like you just start seeing the spots dry up, and it's going to be a really interesting negotiation because the Cavs have this, and guys, you have to remember that this is a negotiation. It's not personal, but it is personal, and and the cold logical GM that only if you think that the best move for Kobe Altman is to say, all right, Colin, whatever your best offer is, go get it and we'll match it. Like, that's fine. And you might save some money, but there are humans at play here. Yeah. And it's going to be a really interesting dance for Kobe of how much do I offer, knowing that the marketplace is a little bit, drier than maybe Colin's team thought it was going to be. What kind of term, what kind of money? And then Colin has to figure out, like, hey, do I think I'm going to get better than that? And, you have ego involved here. And by the way, it's okay for ego to be involved here. People act like that's a bad thing. Like, you ever try to negotiate for a new job with a new company? Yeah, you take it personal what they offer you, and that makes perfect sense. So it's going to be really.
I like the Bomani Jones anecdote about every time he negotiates with ESPN, he tells his agent not to let him know what the offers were until the third round of negotiations, because he knows the first two are going to make him so offended he can't work with them anymore.
Correct. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think if you were just to say gut outcome, I think they'd land somewhere, near where the reported numbers have been, with some decent term, a number that's fair, but doesn't, limit the Cavs' ability to do things moving forward. But I still think Colin's back for on a multi-year deal. If you were to, ask me what I think will happen and what I think should happen which
Yeah,
shows that I believe in you, Kobe.
And I think it's important to note, Fedor did report that his sense is not that this is going to be necessarily like an ugly negotiation or that the Cavs would come in with a low ball. Like, they value Colin. They respect Colin. I mean, Kobe said at the Agbaji press conference, like, everyone knows how they feel about him. So it'll be interesting to see if this gets resolved quickly. I would love a resolution here because I hate this as a topic. It's just, it's gone on for so long.
If you think we were eager to get the draft done so we could stop speculating, I'm so eager to see a deal get done.
And I think it's important to note for everybody that's kind of either new to this process or just doesn't have a firm understanding. If a player signs an offer sheet with a team, you cannot orchestrate a sign and trade from that point on. It's either match or don't. Sign and trades are negotiated prior to the signing of an offer sheet. So I think that's a really important thing to kind of get everybody aware of on the front end here.
Yeah, I want to ask you, because I know my answer, but does the drafting of Agbaji affect your Colin Sexton negotiations much at all? Or your interest in bringing him back?
For this roster, I mean, at the end of the day, Lauri Markkanen is a 4 and only a 4, and he still ended up playing a ton of small forwards. So the selection of Agbaji wouldn't impact my feelings of Colin Sexton. I think he works well with him. I think you can make a lot of lineups work there. But at the end of the day, like, I think you just got to retain talent, like, and that's my biggest thing. If a big sign and trade offer came through and addresses a different position of need, that's one thing. But I wouldn't let the selection of Agbaji influence my decision making there.
I completely agree. I think that Agbaji certainly can play minutes at the 3. I think Isaac can we spent an entire season watching Isaac play minutes at the 3. It was pretty fine. It's not like it was like an abject disaster. And Lowry was successful at the 3. So, like, you look at, they have enough to fill that position. Do they have a 6'8", Nick Batum sized wing right now? No, but I just don't. I think it is an unreasonable panic. What they didn't have last year, prior to the Karras trade, was enough 6'5" to 6'7" players they could count on the wing. They have Karras now.
I think honestly they
have Isaac.
Lot.
They have Agbaji.
I think people wanted them to take a swing for one in the second round and see if it could work. But at the end of the day, is anyone in the second round that kind of fits that mold earning time at small forward over Lowry, over Agbaji, over Okoro, over Wade, over
it's the same
Jetty.
roster spot.
Jetty's still there. Like, there's a lot of guys that can play minutes there that I feel comfortable with, especially if the rest of the roster is healthy. So yeah, I don't think there's a long-term solution at small forward yet. Although I would say maybe Agbaji could play there as he continues to fill out and whatnot. But especially with this roster, like when you're talking about a guy that's 6'6" in shoes, 6'10" wingspan, strong, with Mobley and Allen,
6'5" and 3/4, Justin. So you have to round down so you can be pessimistic on Twitter.
That's right. That quarter of an inch difference between him and AJ Griffin is a big difference maker.
Who, by the way, we actually don't know how tall he is because he didn't get measured at the combine.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Well played, Carter. I do think, though, moving on from Sexton, moving on from those questions, I think the biggest topic right now is whether or not a Ricky Rubio reunion would be a smart idea for the Cavs. I've seen a lot of debate both in our Discord and on Twitter about that, and I'd love to get your feelings on a possible Ricky reunion, Carter.
It is a complicated question. I think that I've got some concerns, I guess would be the way to frame it. I think depending on how much it costs to bring a guy back, it's really because of the aforementioned roster crunch that the Cavs have, assuming, again, that there are no trades made, there's no consolidations or salary adjustment dumps or anything like that. They're just going to run out of roster spots really fast, so it's really hard to invest in a really important position for the team for a guy who probably won't be back till January and probably will take a minute to get going.
Yeah.
And so I think that, if they had drafted, let's say, an Andrew Nembhard or someone in the second round, that, you know, you go, oh, you know, we want to give some development reps to this guy anyway. Why not?
Yeah.
That makes me feel a little different. But if their backup point guard plan ends up being just as a result of this roster crunch that they have, if the backup point guard is Colin and Karras, some combo of them, then I'm a little concerned. I won't lie to you.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, to me, the whole Ricky for the mid-level exception is, one, is it going to cost the full thing? Because if you're able to break that up and maybe address the backup center position, you might feel a little bit better about that. But I think if you are signing Ricky, you have to deal with at least the possibility that he's more coach than player next year, and that maybe he's in the Andre Iguodala role where he's there to help Andrew Wiggins realize his potential, and maybe Colin is that player this year where he's helping him with the playmaking and just making the existing roster better than it is. I think I'd probably want to look at other options first. Someone like Kyle Anderson, even though he's not a point guard, is a very good playmaker and I would find interesting. But I do think that if you're going through the decision-making process, you don't hit on some other targets and you want to bring Ricky back, I think I would be fine with that. I mean, from a fan standpoint, I would love Ricky back. I think he was one of my favorite members that we've had from just kind of a vibe standpoint, and he brought a lot to the table. But obviously, we've been through the last couple of years situations where the Cavs are down to one or no point guards. And that I think it's understandable for Cavs fans to be a little bit nervous about that possibility again. But Carter, I did a little bit of a research project because we went through area of that's outside of our expertise when it comes to the draft. And I thought, let's do this with a bang when it comes to evaluating the playmaking options for the Cavs. So I looked at all the available point guards, unrestricted free agent point guards, and some other options here. And I have some findings for you. So I'm going to use two metrics here. I'm going to read these definitions. They are courtesy of B-Ball Index. They do a fantastic job. They've had people from that site go on to front office opportunities in the NBA. The first one is passing creation quality, Carter, which analyzes playmaking ability through the quality of scoring opportunities that a player creates for teammates through their passing. Higher caliber playmakers tend to create opportunities for teammates that are easier than a non-playmaker. Part of that comes from the offensive scoring ability. Part of that comes through the vision to see the right player to pass to. A part of that is the execution of the passes so that it's accurate, the ball isn't turnover, and placed in a spot where the shooting player doesn't need to spend time pulling up the shot and impacting the openness of that shot. So the data
are you reading War and Peace right now? My God.
I am. I'm going through these definitions first on the front end so I don't have to explain it, Carter. Not everybody is used to these stats. We're nerding out here. We're getting into rotation stuff.
I'm overwhelmed.
Data used to calculate passing creation quality includes location of the assists as well as the conversion rates on potential assists for those players relative to the rates for the same players passed to from other teammates or league average types of scoring looks. Leaders for this stat were Trae Young, Jokic, Curry, Luka, LaMelo, and Garland. No big surprises there. The other stat I'm using is playmaking talent, which this metric factors in passing creation volume, creation quality, passing versatility, passing efficiency, and a small weight given to scoring gravity. So basically weighing how good they are as a playmaker on a whole, factoring in volume and all that kind of stuff. So ranking these options by playmaking talent, Carter, we have Elfrid Payton, Dennis Schroeder, Dragic, Raul Neto, DJ Augustine, DeLon Wright, and way down in the 51st percentile of playmaking talent is Austin Rivers. Not a lot of great options. Payton here has the highest playmaking talent at the 92nd percentile, Schroeder in the 88th, Dragic in the 87th. But one thing stood out to me, Carter, when I looked up existing members of the Cavs when it comes to playmaking talent, and Karis LeVert ranks higher than all free agent options in playmaking talent in the 92nd percentile and the 89th percentile in pass creation quality. Where would you guess that Colin Sexton ranks for playmaking talent in his last full season in the NBA, Carter?
Among that group,
Yes.
second.
So he actually finished just below Elfrid Payton in the 89th percentile for playmaking talent and 81st percentile for pass creation quality.
Among that group.
Among that group. This is for the NBA as a whole. So this is including guys like Jokic. This is in the NBA, all eligible players. He was in the 89th percentile for playmaking talent and 81st for pass creation quality, setting guys up.
That's encouraging. Go ahead. You're still cooking. I can tell.
I'm still cooking with gas here, Carter. So when I'm looking at that, I do kind of wonder if you are able to at least utilize a lot of those guys in the second unit, maybe even LeVert and Sexton together to generate some playmaking opportunities. The one thing I don't think is captured in these stats, and this is where the mix of advanced analytics and actually watching the game comes into play, is both Colin Sexton and Karis LeVert can get sped up at times. They can get very shot happy. They can get rushed by the impacts of the defense. And for that reason, if we were to sign someone like Ricky Rubio and count on Sexton and LeVert, I think I would want to sign someone like a Raul Neto or DJ Augustine or even DeLon Wright, although I think Wright and Ricky would be a little tough from a cost perspective, just to have an option that JB could go to calm guys down, to get everybody into their sets, because I think these two can work, but I do think you need to make sure that you're signing one or two other backup point guards to kind of give them a change of pace if necessary.
So just a reminder to everyone, the Cavs entered today, as far as I know, with 11 rostered players. Mm-hmm. If they re-sign Colin, that takes you to 12.
13 for Agbaji.
When they sign Agbaji, that takes you to 13. So assuming Isaiah Mobley signs on a two-way, which has been reported, you have 2 roster spots left. And you have, in terms of established, you have nobody at backup point guard right now in the most conventional sense, and really nobody at backup 5, though you could argue you're a little more ready to take that on because you have Evan, who plays a lot of backup 5.
Yeah, when Mobley and Allen play most of the center minutes.
You pretty much get 48 minutes at the 5 between those two, where you really don't get 48 at the point guard position with someone who you're really comfortable with there, though you've obviously made the devil's advocate case. So my expectation is that this team invests their remaining, roster spots in a point guard and a center, and I think at the backup 5, you're definitely expecting a minimum salary player, a guy, you've mentioned a guy like JaVale McGee, though I wouldn't mind them throwing a little bit of scratch at that, though it puts a damper in my Isaiah Mobley for a future backup 5 campaign.
McGee or like Bismack Biyombo or even someone like Serge Ibaka who's a good locker room presence and maybe can give you some minutes, like that's probably what I'd be looking at if they're available for the minimum.
So the problem here, Justin, is they can't do this strategy if they sign Ricky Rubio and get another point guard. Like they either have, if they sign Rubio and they want to start the season with a backup point guard on the roster, they either have to find a two-way player like Brandon Goodwin to be a stopgap, which I think is a pretty good idea if they can find the right guy. Goodwin was awesome for his role last year. Or they have to forego a backup 5 on the roster. Yeah. I'm not quite sure what the right solution is here. I mean, if you are dead set on Ricky, it forces them to make some very hard decisions, and I think that's a little bit why I'm not so dead set on Ricky, because it makes you make other concessions until he comes back healthy, and even then you're still hoping he comes back where he was and not terribly diminished, and that's just going to be a challenge for this team. They have, you can say that this team doesn't have a ton of depth, but they have a lot in that 9 through 13 rotational spot. They have guys like Jetty, they have guys like Dean Wade and Lamar Stevens,
Kevin Love.
I mean, they just have a lot of bodies that that you're expecting to be on this team next year. That they have guaranteed money going towards. So I just am a little cold on the Ricky thing, though I'll totally understand why they would do it. But to your point, I do think that if they do it, you almost have to see how Colin and Karras can do.
Yeah, and if that is the route you go, if you are banking on the combination of Colin and Karras to get it done from a playmaking perspective, and you can always make adjustments throughout the course of the year and trade for one, or pivot if it's not working out. But if that is the route you go, I actually have a little bit of a proposal that I'm interested to get your thoughts on, Carter.
Oh, tell me about it.
I don't think Evan Mobley should be the stagger backup 5. I think it should be Jarrett Allen. I think you would want Jarrett Allen with Kevin Love, with Sexton and LeVert, because Jarrett Allen is the better pick and roll player, and both of those guys are good pick and roll ball handlers. You have supplemental playmaking from Kevin Love, so you have as much experience as possible at the 4 or 5 positions, and you're also maximizing the creation ability of both LeVert and Sexton as pick and roll ball handlers with Jarrett Allen. Whereas with the starters, when you take Sexton and Allen out of the starting lineup, if that's the way that you go to stagger, all of a sudden, let's say it's Garland, LeVert, I would assume he would come in off the bench. You can switch LeVert and Sexton if you'd like, but Garland, LeVert, maybe Agbaji, Lauri Markkanen, and Evan Mobley, you can feel pretty confident that that lineup's going to work. And then you have that second unit, LeVert bridging over with Sexton, LeVert, maybe Agbaji, maybe Okoro, Love, and Allen. I think that that could make those lineups work just by switching which of Evan and Jarrett ends up acting as the backup power, or backup center, I should say.
So I think your logic is very strong here. I think you have enough shooting in those bench mob units to support, and enough supplementary playmaking between Kevin and Karras. I think about what Kevin was for Colin early on in his career. When Kevin was healthy enough to be able to be productive, looking a couple years back. And it was so wild when he would come on the floor after, a bout of, dealing with a back injury. Then you'd go, oh my God, the offense is moving. Just, having that know-how on the floor. So I think it's a very strong concept. One thing I think they like about pairing Evan and Kevin is that Evan can go guard on the perimeter a little easier than Jarrett. And they can just kind of play Love closer to the rim and expose his foot speed a little bit less. So I think you do lose a little bit of the defensive versatility in that pairing of Evan and Kevin. But I think the logic holds. I think the only counter to this is, what if Evan comes out and his creation gets 20% better? Yeah. And you go, oh no, we actually want Evan to be the offensive anchor on these
for the
ridiculous units.
I mean, that could work, right? And I think Sexton's growth as an off-ball player could help facilitate that being possible. The one thing I'll say is it would also really kind of depend on, I think the effectiveness of that unit would depend on how much growth he's made as a screen setter as well. I just think that's such an important element, especially for Karras LeVert. You need to have a good screen setter with him, although maybe Kevin Love can help free him up a little bit. I just think that's a little different with his tendency to pop. I guess when it comes to Ricky and weighing the options of relying on your existing players for playmaking versus maybe going a different direction, it depends on what other moves are there, right? If the Cavs end up, because they have such a kind of glut at wings where you probably want LeVert, Okoro, Agbaji, Sexton, all these guys to get a lot of minutes at the 2 and 3. If all of a sudden you don't have a spot available for Jetty Osman, maybe you look at a move for a TJ McConnell, or you move him for an Alec Burks, someone that can play a bit of backup point guard, but also flex over to the 2 and maybe even the 3 at 6'6". And maybe that kind of gives you more supplemental playmaking if the Knicks are looking to clear some long-term cap by moving off of Alec Burks. If you were to go for a Burks or a McConnell, obviously you feel a lot better about using the mid-level exception on Ricky Rubio, because then it's basically all upside and there isn't the opportunity cost. As much as this team still needs a long-term option at the 3, there's so many guys that I would prioritize playing, whether it's Agbaji or Okoro, like just to get the sense of how they can play at those positions. I would prioritize giving them playing time versus taking a swing on someone like a TJ Warren, where the upside of TJ Warren, if he's able to reach his potential, is probably just innings eater at small forward. Like that's not going to be your long-term option ever at the small forward position. That's why I'm not even like, given the fact that LeVert had a really tough situation at the end of last season, Okoro didn't make massive leaps that I think would increase his trade value, and Sexton is coming off of that injury, I just don't see the ammunition to pull off a major trade this offseason. And I'm fine with a patient approach and evaluating the guys that we do have, because I think they have the opportunity to really elevate both their trade value and also maybe potentially fill into long-term roles with the Cavs.
So a couple things there. You machine gunned a lot of takes. I got to figure out which one to react to.
We've been so stuck on draft stuff that now I'm just like,
I know you're
diving right into this.
So first thing, I've been pining for some TJ McConnell for some time. Yeah. And I do think like if you make a move like that, if you go to like trade to secure a backup point guard, I do think you really shouldn't be investing in a guy like Ricky. Like McConnell has money and term for the next couple years, playing pretty much the exact same role you're going to ask Ricky to play. With that said, I do want to ask you this, going back to the roster crunch kind of thing I presented earlier. Let's assume Ricky is being added, and I'm not going to pretend to know what the number is going to be. So let's just not even account for that. Assume that the 15th spot on the roster will be a minimum signing. Would you rather sign a second point guard with that 15th spot, or a backup 5 with that 15th spot?
I think I'd rather go with like a Raul Neto and just have someone that we know.
Raul Neto's too good for these conversations. Dang it.
He was on a minimum contract last year, Carter.
I know. I'm just joking, Justin. I love him.
I think I would bring him in and then maybe explore trade options to bring in a backup 5, like even if it's cost cutting. I do find it hard to envision a spot for Jetty in the rotation, just with other guys getting prioritized.
Find a spot for Agbaji in the rotation right now.
Yeah, and maybe the solution to make the roster work is that Kevin, Laurie plays more minutes at the 4 because we have more guys that can play at the 3. Kevin plays at the 5, but we just make sure that through rotation management that Laurie and Kevin never share the court at the same time as the 4-5 combo. So even if Kevin loves playing as a 5, it's either coming with Jared Allen or Evan Mobley. Like maybe that's the way that you can make this work. But I think I would prioritize playmaking, because playmaking was not addressed in the draft. And I think that's perfectly fine, but there does need to be the supplemental moves. And I think I would prioritize signing someone like Raul Neto along with Ricky, just so that you have some insurance here in case Ricky isn't physically able to contribute in the ways that you'd hope, which I don't think is an unrealistic possibility. And also banking on having like an insurance policy in place if the combination of Sexton, LeVert, and secondary playmakers aren't enough to get the appropriate juice to that second unit lineup.
Yeah, I think I'd lean that way too, acknowledging a couple things. This is a tough pitch. And Chris Fedor talked about this on his latest pod. Like, if you go to Raul Neto, is like, hey, could you maybe play backup point guard for us if our other guys can't hack it until Ricky Rubio comes back? Like, that's not exactly the sexiest pitch that has ever been given in free agency. Knowing kind of where the team's priorities are. So, like, that is the one kind of mitigating factor that makes this not a great strategy, where you can just go to, Serge Ibaka and be like, hey, you want to play some spot minutes here and there? Because I think if they get a decent name, like if they sign JaVale McGee is going to get 8 minutes at the 5. You'd assume so. And I think Evan would just play a little bit more minutes at the 4 in that paradigm. So and
I've liked other options too. Like DeLon Wright is someone that I really like for this team.
You just got to spend for him in a way.
You do have to spend for him, and I think that would take you out of the Ricky conversation. But someone like Wright, I think, is interesting. But I think like the real kind of goal behind me looking at the playmaking talent grades and the pass creation quality is just because somebody was on another team and we didn't see them miss open guys and we haven't seen their limitations doesn't mean they are better just because they have the label of point guard. Like you look at DeLon Wright and the playmaking talent, 59th percentile.
It's not that good. I've never been as enamored with him.
Yeah, his pass creation quality is 26th percentile. What I do like about DeLon Wright is I think he can work with Garland. I think he can work with Sexton. I think he can work with LeVert, and you can make him an effective part of your rotation. However, I do still think you're in a position where you are leaning on the existing guys on the roster to do that playmaking because he isn't able to do that at the same level.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that. I think DeLon Wright is a pick maybe in a pre-Agbaji world that I'm not as interested in a post-Agbaji world. Like, they're going to be just fine at the 2. Like, yeah. and like, you pick DeLon Wright because you can play a little bit of 1 and a little bit of 2. Whereas, Ricky's going to be playing a lot of 1.
And honestly, like, if you look at Wright, why are you going to, like, as much as I like him, at the same time, Isaac Okoro was in the 54th percentile in playmaking talent, not that far off from DeLon Wright, and 67th in pass creation quality. As we know, he's a good passer, like for those reps. And if you're not relying on Wright to provide you with playmaking and you're kind of asking him to be that defender alongside Colin or Darius, why are you not giving those minutes to Okoro? Like, you have to consider the developmental upside because we're not trying to make this roster a finished product for next season. It's still trying to build up and figure out what is the highest ceiling play. And for all those people that wanted to take developmental swings in the draft, whether it's someone like Jalen Williams, who's the same age as Okoro, or Ousmane Dieng, it takes reps. It takes some growing pains. And I think we have to have an understanding that this isn't going to be a finished product next season. And there is still reasons to give someone like Isaac Okoro those reps over someone like DeLon Wright, as much as I'm a fan of his game.
Yeah, Andy Mulak in the chat said, Justin, I think you're DeLon wrong about this one. It made me laugh.
Listen, it wouldn't be the first time I've been wrong on this here podcast, and won't even be the last time of this summer. But I'm just trying to illustrate a point and just say that there is a statistical argument behind this, basically, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the reality is, I think, and like I personally think you're a little bit overrating some of these playmaking metrics, and because I don't think they all the way account for like just point guard crap, like hey, you need to get over there, like just
there's stuff that's never going to be captured in metrics.
And a guy like Howell Neto can do that in a way that I just don't think Colin can do right now.
Which is why I'm advocating for adding a kind of a real point guard, someone that can set the table and calm them down. Because I think,
damn it, Andy Mulak just said, I'm going to be honest, I didn't even disagree with him. I just needed to get the joke off.
See, that is someone that understands the podcast. That is someone that understands what we are all about here. And I will note one name I didn't mention is Tyus Jones. The reason I didn't mention him, I know everyone's like, well, they drafted Kennedy Chandler. Like they might move on from him. They are not letting the insurance policy for Ja Morant be Kennedy Chandler. I think they moved off Melton so that they could pay Tyus Jones because Melton had money on his contract there. I think he's back with Memphis. I think he's going to be out of the price range. Someone like Monte Morris is maybe a little interesting, although his playmaking metrics aren't fantastic. And once again, that's a trade candidate there. So if you went that direction, you're not impacting the roster crunch because you'd be moving someone from the kind of 13 roster spots that are already spoken for at this time. But I don't know if he's necessarily the playmaking set the table type of guard that we're talking about wanting with this group.
No, probably not. I actually am at the point now where, like, short of a big kind of swing trade, or even a small swing type of trade, like a trade for McConnell, like I'd rather them just get some insurance pieces in free agency. Take care of business with Colin. I'm actually, even though the Ricky stuff, I'm a little cooler on it. I'm just not going to worry about it because I think that's your 9th or 10th man. You're really betting on the rest of this core to lead you into the playoffs. And, I think that I'm not like freaking out about however free agency goes down. Like, would I maybe just straight up pursue someone like Howell Neto over Ricky Rubio, who I'm pretty worried about from an injury perspective? Maybe, but I see the case, and like ultimately, like all I have to do
and we're
is
risk
see the
adverse,
case,
right? Like,
yes,
you and I are risk adverse, and we like the pieces that are already in place. And I think it's important to note, like when people say run it back, guys aren't running it back. There's going to be an adjustment period next season, because even if Sexton gets signed to an extension and no other major moves are made, Sexton and LeVert have never played on the same team together. Ochai Agbaji is a brand new piece. There are going to be significant parts of this rotation that have not played minutes together. And I have a hard time believing they would leave 2 other roster spots open. So you're talking about 5 out of the 15 spots on this rotation being new players that haven't played together with this unit. So there is going to be an adjustment period when it comes to the Cavs next year. And no matter what, running it back is never going to be that accurate of a description of next season.
No, it will not. But we're gonna find out. I think the Cavs are gonna take care of their business pretty quick. At least I hope they do. Free agency opens at 6 on Thursday Eastern. So yeehaw, man.
I hate the Canada Day start to free agency, Carter, because I'm always out of town with sketchy like cell phone reception. If massive stuff happens over the weekend, I'm sorry, we're probably going to have to wait until Tuesday to do the podcast, Carter. I hate
Joke's
to break
on
that
you,
to you,
buddy. I'm recording without your ass.
Okay, I mean that's fine as well. I get it. I understand where you're coming from. We'll see. I hope everything gets resolved quickly. I will say, of the trade candidates, I think my favorite is Alec Burks. I would love a reunion there if the Knicks are looking to shed salary. And
I
there's
still
some way
got
that
my eyes on old Gordon. I'll never quit him, Justin.
Gordon Hayward.
Old
who
Gordon.
knows? I mean, Mitch Kupchak did say that they are going to bring Miles Bridges back, so maybe they need to shed some salary because of that. That would certainly make the wing rotation a little more cramped. But I thought this was at least interesting. I completely agree, Carter. I don't think these playmaking metrics are the be all end all when it comes to playmaking talent. Like I said, the thing that's not captured in averages is kind of those tendencies, right? Like, and I do think LeVert and Sexton can get sped up. We are still talking about Sexton coming off a major injury as well. We don't know if he's going to be himself. So to rely on him for such a major role, there's an element of risk in that as well.
Justin, I know we need to wrap because my daughter just slammed on the door to clearly say goodnight to me. But I did just get a correction sent to me. The free agency does not start at 6 p.m. The moratorium starts on Thursday at 6 p.m. And that is a very important distinction to make. So my apologies.
I can't believe it, Carter, that you wouldn't look into the proper research
Of
and
course
be
I
prepared
don't.
for this podcast.
Well, I have a brand to maintain, Justin.
You know, we don't both do, and I think we've played our roles well today. I've played my role as ranting lunatic pretty well today. I think I mixed some good points in there, Carter.
Yeah, you did, buddy. We'll see what our retention rate is as you start explaining those metrics. I think it's just going to.
That's probably going to go over people's heads. But I just want to do it on the front end.
Just hit the plus 30 second a couple times, guys, and you'll get right through it.
I don't think instructions after the fact are going to be that helpful. But you know what? That's
the joke was there, though.
That's our problem for
much
the
like
listeners,
much like our guy Andy Mulak. We care more about getting jokes off than being factual.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited for free agency to start. We didn't talk Darius Garland at all because I think we both kind of expect an extension there. And if we don't get one, we probably have a lot to talk about next week. So we'll see how that goes. Big thanks to everyone that tuned in live on YouTube. If you want to support us on YouTube, you can like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, you can send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.